Hey Tableau users. So today we're going to be checking out a tool called Tableau Prep. So Tableau is set up to do lots of really fancy visualization, some of which you've seen, and I hope you'll keep exploring that. But there's often several kind of heavy-duty steps that need to happen to the actual data before it's in the right shape to do the visualizations that we want to do. And Tableau Desktop is not set up all that well to do the actual data manipulation beforehand. Luckily, there's another tool that Tableau puts out called Tableau Prep, and we'll be learning about that for this assignment. Tableau Prep, even if you don't end up using this in your job, if you do analytics, chances are you'll see something like this, and so the concepts that you learn here and the skills should transfer over whether you're using Prep or not. Okay, so let's get started. Here is what you should see when you open Tableau Prep. Kind of looks like the Tableau desktop interface at first. Let's hit this connect to data. And I'm going to be using two small data files called about some plants and some products, manufacturing plants and products. So I'm going to go text file here, and then with the control button I can hit both. I can select both of these at the same time and hit open. So these two files are available on Canvas for you to download if you'd like to follow along, and I suggest that you do so. And notice now I have this kind of pane here, and I have both of these data sets here. So one that's blue and one that's kind of yellow. So the blue one, let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. This is just a simple data set. The story is it's about a company that owns a few manufacturing plants. So each plant has an ID. And then in this data set, each plant is using a different type of welding machines. So some plants are using this A11 model and some this A32 model. So that's it in this data set. Let's take a look at the other data set. This is about products that are produced for this manufacturing company. This is the date of production. And then there are daily yields for both product 101 and product 102, so two different products. You can see the daily yields here. And then not only for products but also for plants. So each of these products is produced at multiple plants, so I have this plant ID here. It's a quick tour of the data. Now let's see what we can do in this Tableau Prep setting with this data. And to do that, let's hop up here, and I'm going to hit this plus sign. So as we go along, you'll see that kind of a map will unfold about how we're going to change the data. At the end of the day, we're going to create an output and actually save this data on the computer in a different format from how we started. So if I hit this plus sign, I got a bunch of options, and we're going to walk through most of these. I'm going to hit Add Step here. That's the first one. So if I just add step, notice I have this thing that says Clean 1, and down here it gives me a view of the data. So here are my four columns: date, daily yield for 101, daily yield for 102, and product plant ID. And in this type of step, I can do a couple of things. So I can filter, and notice it pulls up this calculation here. So for example, I could go to, let's say I just wanted plant 1 and I didn't care about plant 2. So I can say product plant ID equals 1. The calculation is valid. I'm going to hit save. And now notice before I had plants 1 and plant 2. Now I just have plant 1, excuse me. Another type of thing I can do here is if I don't need all of these columns anymore, I can just click on one. I can remove it. So as you can see, all of the data in this data set is all from November 5th. And so maybe if I already know that, I don't need to keep that date column around, so I can remove it. And notice that the changes are tracked up here. So I filtered, and then I've removed the field. They're also tracked over here. I can also do this. I can create a calculated field, as we've done in Tableau Desktop. So if, for example, I wanted the weekday of the date, or if there was some type of if I wanted to change the units of the daily yield or something like that, I could also do it in this setting. And now I set this up to run. So right now I'm setting up a flow, and then when I'm finished, I'll be able to run the whole thing, and it'll do all the steps in order. So if I wanted to, I could click here, and I get this same drop-down box. just since I'm giving examples, I'm actually going to remove this step. We don't need that step. That was just an example. And now let's take a look at another option. So we're going to come back to aggregate in a minute, but first I'm going to click this Add Pivot here. And notice it's got this kind of icon that says, here's some long columns of data, and here's some short columns of data, and maybe I'm going from one to the other. And that's the idea. Let's look again at what's going on here. If I look at these daily yield values, so right now they're spread out across two rows. I have the yield for product 101, or sorry, two columns in this column, and the yield for product 102 in this column. It would be equivalent if I just put all of these yields into the same column, but then I wouldn't be done because I'd need another column that said, hey, which ones are yields for product 101 and which are yields for product 102. So what this pivot does is it'll do that. If you have data of the same type that's spread out across multiple columns, you can gather it together into the same column. Or if it's gathered in the same, you can spread it out. And there are advantages to both formats. Let's actually see what happens so we can get a better feel for it. So I know I want to be dealing with these daily yield columns, so I'm going to pull them into the pivoted fields section here. Daily yield 101. I also want daily yield 102, so I'm going to pull it over into the values there. And now notice I have a snapshot of what this data set looks like down here. I still have all of my daily yields, but now they're in the same column. The plant IDs have been duplicated. So now before I had one row for each plant ID. Now I have two rows for plant ID 1 because within plant 1 I produce 101 and 102. And I have two rows for plant 2. That's for product 101 and 102 again there. Okay. So that is an example of a pivot step. We can do a little more processing here. So notice now the names here are not so nice. And so I'm actually going to create a calculated field that just gives me a more clean product ID. So I'm going to take pivot 1 names. Here's like a bonus function for you. Give me just a sec, I'll explain what it does here. So the right function just takes, if you have a string of characters, it'll go to the right of that string, to the end of it, and it'll pull off a certain number of characters. So over here, notice in both daily yield 101 and daily yield 102, the last 3 characters are the ones that I care about because those are my product IDs. So if I say, hey, pull off the last 3 characters, hit save, now I have product ID, and I just have this 101 and 102. That's a lot nicer than pivot 1 names and with these daily yield messy things here, so I can just remove this field. And now take a look at my data set. For every plant and every product, I have a daily yield value for November 5th. Okay. I'm going to leave that step here, and we'll take a little break, but in the next video, we'll pick up right where we left off.